Okay, so I think we're ready to get started now. So, hey, and welcome to day 2 of the Independent Games Summit. Before I start, I have a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, please turn off your cell phones or set them to vibrate if you could, because everyone forgets that and then tragedy ensues. Secondly, we do have evaluation forms, but they will be coming a little bit later. And if any of you noticed yesterday, the evaluation forms were a little bit general. They're kind of for the entire Independent Games Summit. So you're welcome to give us an overall good mark. But if you have particular comments about sessions when the evaluation forms do arrive, please put them in the notes at the bottom, and then we'll get them. Another point, some people have had a little bit of trouble finding the schedule, the detailed schedule for today, and it's on page 53 of your show guide, and it's in the tutorial section, which perhaps confused some people. So if you want to know exactly what is happening today, it's on page 53 of the show guide, and I'm just actually going to run through what's on this morning, just so everyone knows. So a little bit later this morning, at 10:45, we have Matthew Wegner talking about the Indie Bootstrap Kit, and that's just a short 15-minute session. Then we have a coffee break. At 11:15, we have Lloyd Melnick, and he's talking about indie retail distribution. And at 11:45, we have an indie development logistics panel with people from Grubby Games and Gastronaut Studios and Ninja Bee and a few others. But firstly, we've got a lecture from the IGF Design Award winner for last year with Braid, and he's going to be talking about indie prototyping, so please welcome Jonathan Blow.
All right, this is going to kind of be an interesting lecture. When I did the dry run of it, it came out to be about an hour and a half, and I have more like 35 minutes. So my preferred response to that kind of situation is to keep all the demoing and examples and massively cut the introduction and the sort of binding justifications and things like that. So it may just end up me showing you a bunch of stuff, and you'll be like, what? Why did he even, and then maybe sleep on it, and maybe you'll understand. I don't know. So anyway, prototyping for indies. Here are some burning questions which I used to directly answer, and now maybe will come through by osmosis. What exactly is a prototype? How do you choose a good prototype to make? Before we go on to the rest of the questions, what is a prototype? Hopefully most of us know, but it's something that you make that is really simple and easy, doesn't take much programming, doesn't take much art, and that helps you evaluate whether this is really going to be a good game for you to work on and spend a couple years of effort into, right? So how do you pick the right prototype to make? How do you know when it's successful? And how long should you spend doing that versus going into production, right? You can spend a long time on a prototype which you're essentially going to throw away, and that maybe doesn't feel that good, right? If you're all worried about money and schedules. And what I want to say is, like Chris Hecker and Chaim Gingold gave a lecture on prototyping last year, which some of you may have seen from their experiences at Maxis. But programming is very different for indies than it is for non-indies, and if we have time at the end, I'll get into the specific reasons why. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into an example of the first game where I ever had a deliberate prototyping phase. This was a thing called Gall, and it was a gestural spellcasting game. So if you've played games like Black and White or Arx Fatalis, you kind of draw a gesture on the screen with a mouse. I'll have a picture of that in the next slide. And that casts a spell. Actually, the first version of Darwinia had a gestural command system too, but they cut that out for a later version. And those games always, like Black and White and Arx, always disappointed me for like two significant reasons. One was that the gesture recognizing wasn't very good. So like in Black and White, I'm trying to draw a spiral to like cast Wonderwood or something, and it didn't understand that I was drawing this spiral, and I had to do it like 5 times, and it's so frustrating. So as a guy with a technical background, I was like, I can do way better than that, and I know that. And that'll make the game feel a lot better. So that was reason number 1 to do this game. But reason number 2 was, after you drew this gesture, the game didn't really care about the nuances in the gesture or the style in which you drew it. It always meant the same thing. Like it always meant Wonderwood or like start the little, gunner guy up. Like it's the same as if you had just bound that command to a function key, and that there was no real point for the actual gestures. So that disappointed me, and I really wanted to do a better job of that. So I came up with this system that I thought was pretty cool. Where you draw the shape. So this isn't an interactive version of the app, so I can't draw it for you right now, but basically that yellow curve is something that I drew with the mouse, and then there's sort of this little program that looks at the shape that I drew and evaluates the various lengths of the things. So in in the whole universe of this game that I envisioned, you play a wizard, and there's like a bunch of wizards, and they're sort of at war, and they, instead of being like a Harry Potter-ish kind of world, it's more like an Operation Flashpoint or like Counter-Strike kind of world, so you spend a lot of time in cover and like hiding yourself. So there's a spell that's called Conceal Magic, and it's about being able to hide yourself but still cast spells, but maybe it interferes with the spells and makes them less effective because you're trying to hide the fact that you're casting them. So up in the upper left corner, you can see there's different meters about how long it lasts and how well it conceals you and like how much it messes with your spells. And the way that you draw this shape actually controlled those meters. And you could trade off and get different flavors of this concealment spell just by drawing the shape in different ways. So like here's a sort of stereotypical way, and the box at the top controls, how long it took, and the one in the lower right is how well it conceals you and stuff. And here's a different version with different outputs in the meters in the upper left, and here's a different version. And that was a pretty cool little prototype app. I was really happy with that. The recognition was solid. I had 5 or 6 spells in there to begin with, and it worked way better than any of those other games. And I was happy, and I was like, awesome. There's my prototype. So now I'm going to go and make the actual game. And I didn't make the full game, but I'll show you how far I got before I stopped. It was going to be a 3D world, kind of like the Gothic games. If you've never played Gothic, it's like Elder Scrolls Oblivion, but with good gameplay. And kind of like this sort of military thing. And I was gonzo into this. I developed a whole fiction for the world, and I was like, okay, I'm going to have some animated characters walking around. Let me try to center this window. I can't. Okay, whatever. I didn't want to draw this disembodied. I wanted the spellcasting to feel really good. So instead of drawing this like disembodied trail, there's like this hand. And I did this hand. It's like this example-based inverse kinematic system with like CCD, cyclic coordinate descent fix-up, to like put the finger in the right place, except it's kind of wonky, so like the finger is bending backwards. Because I moved the view plane like after I did that. But like a lot of work went into this frickin' hand to like make it feel really good to draw stuff. So like I was an Ultima fan, so like here's a blink spell that'll teleport me, some distance proportional to the whatever. And like here, the name Gall staff came from this comedy skit a while ago about D&D players, and they all want to cast Magic Missile. So like Magic Missile was one of the first spells I put in, and you can cast it in whatever. And I wanted it to be like all sorts of games, like Planescape Torment, how you get experience points from talking to people. So like I had this conversation system and blah blah blah, big whatever. That was great, but then at the point at which I actually had a little more in here. I had like some little town buildings and plants, but it's all like code rotted and it like doesn't load for some reason. But anyway, once I was in this game and actually trying to do things in the world, I realized something. I was like, man, I'm trying to cast Magic Missile in like a very specific way. Oh, I just unplugged my laptop. Hold on. And I can't actually, very effectively control the parameters of like this spell that I'm casting. Like I have in my head the intention, and I'm trying to translate that into the shape, and I can't quite really get the thing that I want. And juggling these 4 to 5 parameters is just really hard. And I was just like, wow, if it's really hard for me, and I've been thinking about this for months and working on it, like players are never ever going to get it. And so I tried for a while thinking about like, how do I make players understand this system, and I just came to the conclusion it wasn't going to work. And so that ended up, this thing that I made that was all about just testing this thing was not a good prototype, right? And the reason is that even though it exercised the technical parts of the scheme that I wanted to build, it didn't really exercise the gameplay parts very well. I thought they did because it said, hey, here's the parameters of your spell, but it didn't provide me a way to focus my intention to achieve a deliberate result. And because I didn't have a lot of prototyping experience back then, I thought that the only way to get that was to build this full game, or to just do it with like low production values and then ramp up the production value. But the real answer should have been, I should have taken that little prototype before there was the rest of the game and built like some kind of mini game, like 2D sort of thing, where I'm trying to deliberately do something by drawing these shapes. Like, I don't know, a version of like Tapper or Root Beer Tapper for the under 18 crowd, where somebody orders a drink and I try to make the drink with a magic spell or something. That would have been way better than what I did. It took a long time to make that, and it ultimately didn't go anywhere. I mean, I used the code for something else that I made money off, so that was fine, but that game itself didn't really go anywhere. So I have a history as a tech guy, and we're always like, we get excited by solving these big technical problems, and we always want to prove that we have like a really big like tech penis kind of thing. And so that's like all our game designs tend to gravitate toward that way. And I was like, man, that happened with that game too, and I don't want to go that way anymore. So I made the deliberate choice that I was going to prototype a lot from here on out, do a lot of things in 2D, and in fact most of my final game designs would be 2D if I can manage it, and really focus on the gameplay and try to do things that would be mind expanding and new and deep for the player. So my first cut at that, which had floated around in my subconscious for a while before I actually made it, was this game called Oracle Billiards, which I can demo for you now. Again, this is a low production value thing. It's actually written in a little scripting language that I made. And it's about taking the game of pool, of billiards, and postulating how would that game change if you actually could see the future, right? So pool for most people is about kind of trying to aim a particular shot and like hit the balls in a certain way, and you're like, oh, I kind of missed, and the shot went a little bit over here instead of over there, but I still somehow made it in the pocket, right? In this game, I don't actually have pockets on here because that wasn't part of the prototype, but the green area is the pool table and stuff will bounce off the walls, and the dark balls are the starting configuration, so there's a rack there that I'm going to hit with my cue ball. And the little sort of lighter versions of the balls that you see are where they're going to end up like after I hit the shot, and that's not a prediction. Like every frame, there's like a physics system that's running like thousands of frames of physics, and you can do that because computers are fast and like Newtonian physics is simple. And it just tells me where things are going to end up, and I can adjust the shot power and stuff, and I can hit the ball and like whack. So that was a pretty cool little prototype, and it's got this weird feeling to it. Like after you hit the balls and you watch, and like, yeah, they really are going to where it says they're going to go. But that feels weird because sometimes you get into situations like where you don't quite understand. Let me go for you don't quite understand how the balls are going to get where they're going to get. Like, how does a blue ball get over there? Oh, the cue ball ricochets off that and then hits it and then knocks it over there. And you can kind of see it happening, and your brain goes like, oh, that's happening, like as it unfolds. But and that was cool, but it wasn't what I wanted this game to be. When I set out to do the prototype, I was thinking like, okay, it's going to turn pool into much more of a strategy game than like an aiming game, because the aiming is taken care of for you. So what you're really doing is you're going to be all about trying to get your balls in positions that block the opponent's balls, right? And all that stuff that maybe advanced pool players think about most of the time. And it's going to be much more about strategy than aiming. And that didn't work, and the reason is that, look at this, I'm like rotating the table, and just where balls end up is really chaotic, and like you can't visualize that as a human. I tried some little like trail drawing stuff, and it just didn't work. So you can't make a plan given this thing. You just kind of end up, even though you can tell where things are going to end up, you just kind of like hit the balls anyway and just see where they go. So I added some things in. I added this super fine like turning thing where, so here I'm barely rotating the table that you can almost not notice it. And there's still this really chaotic behavior. And it's kind of neat how all the balls dance around each other and stuff. But like, man, how do you make a game out of that? So I didn't know. And I still don't know. And I consider that a successful prototype, though. It didn't do what I wanted, but I got a feeling out of it that I never gotten out of any game that I'd ever played before. And it's something that maybe I can build on for a future thing, and I learned a lot from it, and it didn't take very long, right? So even though it didn't end in a game that I've made that people can play, that was a really great experience, and I'm happy with that. And it kind of led to another thing that I made, which is this game called Braid, which won an award in the IGF last year. I'm going to demo that now and sort of talk about what it is now, and then I'll talk about how it came to be what it is. So everything you're going to see, it was designed and programmed by me. All the world art is done by David Hellman, who's sitting right over there. And the character art is by Edmund McMillan, who you might know from games like Gish and Blastminer. And David actually has his comic, Lesson is Learned, but the Damage is Irreversible, that actually someone came up to me yesterday and said they loved it. So yeah, it's a great comic. Okay, demo. So a bunch of you may have seen me demo this. I just ran the wrong thing. It's going to crash or something. And oh no, it's not. I didn't run the wrong thing. Okay. Oh man, I totally did run the wrong thing. Okay, hold on a sec. So some of you may have seen demos of this in previous years, and there's going to be a lot of overlap of this with that, so I'm going to keep it short and just kind of hit on the main points. Okay, so this game sort of came out of Oracle Billiards. Oracle Billiards was about playing with the idea of time. It's like, what if I could see the future? And it was really exciting that I could create this thing that sort of let you see the future in a limited way. And from there, it's sort of like all these ideas sprung to mind, like, oh, what if you could, what if you had alternate realities, or what if, you could go backwards in time? But I wanted a simpler framework in order to demonstrate that stuff, because the physics of all those billiard balls flying around was very complicated and hard to understand. But at some point I thought, oh, a 2D platformer like Mario, right? You just move left and right, and you can jump, and it's a very simple kind of world. And get over here a little bit. You can jump up things, you can jump over gaps, but they're easy to understand, and there's no like ricochet, like chaos theory kind of thing in play. You can maybe climb, and you can maybe, launch yourself off the side of a climbable surface and things like that. And that was the world that I wanted to do this stuff in. And then so the question was, what should I work on? There was this mailing list discussion that I had with a bunch of people about how Prince of Persia: Sands of Time was simultaneously a really cool game, but also kind of sucked. Because it let you do all this rewinding, interesting go backwards in time thing, but it was like a power-up, it was very limited, and it didn't feel like it meshed well with the gameplay. And a friend of mine and I both thought it would be really neat if games just let you undo things, and whenever you wanted. So that was the sort of the fundamental design idea that I started this with as a prototype. Like, what if you could just undo anything, anytime? So, here it's prompting me to press shift because I died, and, I hit shift and I can just rewind up and, retry the jump. And the whole game is like that. So I never run out of rewind. It's not a resource. It's not a power-up. It's just a fundamental thing that I always have. So I can never die and I can never, ever lose. How much can you rewind? It sort of depends on the platform and all that, but you can probably rewind about a half an hour or an hour worth of gameplay. So it's not like a little thing, it's like a lot. So I can rewind back toward the beginning of the level, like, and undo all that stuff that I did, blah, blah, blah. And I decided, oh, that was a mistake, and I can go forward and all that. And then like any platformer games, there's a couple of more little rules to the world. Whoops. I can jump on guys to kill them and bounce off. And I want to collect things, right? That gives me a goal. So there's these like puzzle pieces that I want to collect and put together. And I can't reach this one, but if I bounce off the guy, I go higher, right? And that's most of what this world is about. There's a little bit more that you encounter as you go on, but it's really about simple world rules. Here I can bounce twice and go higher. And the bounce sound sort of modulates to indicate that I'm bouncing higher and stuff. But so the idea behind this game was keep the rules very simple, small number of monsters, small amount of things that you do, but play with time from world to world and make an interesting game that way. So each world has a different behavior of time, and then the puzzles in each world are necessarily require you to understand and exploit that particular behavior of time. So I'm just going to show, I'm just going to show one puzzle up here, which is there's this puzzle piece on the right, and I need to jump to get across, but the gap is too long for me to jump, so I need to bounce off this guy, and I need to time that bounce, but it's really hard to time. I missed, but I can watch this sort of fuse on this cannon and use that to prompt me about when to jump, except I'm watching the screen and it's really hard, So this is sort of one of the ways that I try to get the player, used to the rewind mechanic. Okay, whatever. But usually I make that jump on the first try, but no pressure here. So that's kind of the basics of the game. And I'll show you sort of where that went. Because I was a technical guy, right, I had to implement this rewind thing, and there was a certain way that it got implemented. And from that, I just sort of saw, well, not everything has to rewind. What if some objects were immune to your rewind power, right? That wasn't an idea that I had when I started the game. It was only after I implemented what you just saw. So it wasn't something that I could have foreseen before doing the prototype. But I went with that, and that was very successful. So here, I didn't show you this, but there's keys that unlock gates. That's like the other thing. And I killed this guy, and I got a key, but I can't get back out of this pit that I had to go in to get the key. You know, it's just too high to jump and all that. So having played through 4 levels of this and done a lot of jumps so far, I know that I can rewind my way out. But what's interesting is the key came with me this time because it's like sparkling and magical, right? And so is the gate. So like I've unlocked this gate now, and I can rewind back all the way to the beginning of the level, and they're still open because they're sparkling and magical, right? And that sort of opened up this really wide variety of interesting things, a whole world full of puzzles again. So I won't show you this one. No. Okay. Here's another interesting, different way that game mechanic expresses. Like I need to jump across these clouds to get over to that puzzle piece, but there's too big of a gap. Like, I just can't make it. The other thing I forgot to say is don't blame David for when world art looks wacky and like non-matching, because there's still a lot of like prototype art in here and like it's not done. But anyway, but one of these clouds is sparkling and magical. I don't know how well you can see that in the back. And what that means is if I rewind, 2 of those clouds are going to rewind just like everything else, but the 3rd one is going to keep going because it's independent of that. And I can use that to space them out, right, and jump across and just get to the piece, right? And so this world is all about using that little magicalness to do things that would have been impossible if it was just rewind. Every puzzle is like that there. And then I was like, oh, what are some other ways, again, as a technical person, there's a certain way that the rewind was implemented. Like you store all the state about these objects in memory and stuff, and one way that you can drive it is hitting this key to rewind. But I was like, what are some other ways that I can control that, right? Well, I can bind it to your position in space, right? So in this world, if you don't move, time stands still, right? I can jump up and down in place and nothing really happens. I mean, I move, but the monsters don't move. If I move to the right, time goes forward, and guys fall and stuff and shoot out of the cannon. And if I walk left, time goes backwards, right? And that was not that easy to do from a technical standpoint. I mean, it was easy to get the first cut of and prototype, but it became pretty hard eventually. I don't know why I just said that. Anyway, that generates this really interesting way that the world can feel. That's why I made this sort of a Donkey Kong level, is it encourages you to walk left and right and have time go forward and backward. And there's this interesting thing where I want to climb up to the top there and get that puzzle piece, but this guy's in my way, and I can't wait for him to move because of the way the world works. In previous worlds, I could have just waited for him to move and climb up the ladder at the right time, but here I can't, because anytime I'm on this ladder, this guy is always on top of the ladder in this world. So what do I do? That's an interesting puzzle, and how do I get around that, right? And that's sort of what that world is about. I don't know what people were like. Anyway, that's really disturbing when everybody's laughing, and I really don't know why. We don't have, maybe during Q&A. Okay. So this was a really interesting case because it's all this creativity driven by being a designer programmer instead of just being a designer programmer instead of just a designer. Like, I've got all this state of the world like stored in memory that I can rewind and play back, and I'm erasing it every time you rewind. Well, what if I don't erase it, right? What if you can jump around and do your crazy stuff, but when you rewind, instead of being gone, it lives on in a parallel universe that you can see, and it all still happens, right? And then maybe there's objects that are shared between the universes. So this is hard to see because it's a yellow puzzle piece and yellow sparkles, but things that are sparkling yellow like live in both universes at once, and if you influence them in one, it does the same thing in the other. So in this case, I've got the same pit that's too deep, and the way I solve that now is instead of basically the way I solve that now is I just rewind out, and in the parallel universe I still go down there and get the puzzle piece, and because it's shared in the world I get it here too, right? And so a sort of here's some more tangible versions of that, which is I'm trying to pull this lever and open this gate that I'm trying to get through, but it always closes before I can get there, and that's kind of frustrating. Whoops. Okay. So, but what I can do is maybe start out close to it and run over here and open the thing, right? And because that switch is in both universes, if the guy in the parallel universe opens it, it opens in this one too, right? And then I can get the thing. So that's kind of cute. And then here's a world. This is actually like the least like technically cool world, but it was this idea that I had, and the gameplay worked out really well. In this world, you can basically drop this thing that slows down time in a radius. Like most games that have bullet time or something are like bullet time for the whole universe. This is like, I've made like this localized black hole kind of thing where time goes really slow in the middle, and then as I go out from it, time goes faster, and you can see that's sort of reflected in the background. You can see how the leaves falling, like their speed changes, right? And oh man, I didn't show you this puzzle before. Okay, so I showed you the cloud puzzle, right? And you can't solve it. You notice that sparkly magical cloud is actually missing now, so I can't solve this one in the same way. If I rewind, it just leaves the clouds the same. So actually, the way that I end up solving this in this world is, if you do this sort of slowdown, the cloud on the left is going to slow down more than the cloud on the right because it's closer, and you sort of compress them and compress them and compress them, and then take away the slowing influence, right? And now when the clouds sort of rotate back around, they'll be closer together. And if I time the jumps, they're pretty easy, so I should be able to, then I can get across and be happy, right? So that was pretty cool. And there's another world, like the ending and all that, but I won't get into it now. Some of you guys have seen it. Okay, so that was a really rewarding game, and I'm very happy that I made it, and it won an award and all that. The thing about that prototype, it was successful in a very different way from the other ones. Like this one, I did the original prototype in like a week, when I was like on vacation in Thailand and stuff, and I was like really inspired. And it worked really well instantly. And I'm going to show you, like, this was the original prototype of all that. Yeah, it's from January 2005. So there's no animation. I guess you can't see it too well because the colors are kind of dark. Can we get a little bit of lights down and back or something? Anyway, it's got this sort of Mario caricature as the guy, and there's like no animation at all, and it's very cheesy, but it worked. I sent this to a bunch of my friends, and they were like, "Oh, that's really cool. That's the wackiest thing that I've played in a while." And so it didn't need production values for people to play it and enjoy it. The thing is that the people I sent it to were game designers, and they kind of understood that, like, okay, it looks crappy when we start it up, but like we know this guy and we're giving him the benefit of the doubt and stuff. But so I couldn't have evaluated this prototype with like a general like open beta like gamer audience or anything. But it was very, very successful for what it was, and actually. Like here, a lot of the levels from this prototype that I like did in the first week, wow, you really can't see anything, huh? Survived into the final game. So this level that you can't really see is basically a more complicated version of that pit that's too deep to get out of that I showed you. It's exactly the same thing. You go in the pit and you can't get out, and you open the gate. That was great to start with. And then the other thing that really helped me a lot during development was that the game Braid itself, once I'd started in actual production, was a lot like prototyping anyway, right? Because I started on the main game, and it was about developing these worlds where each world had its own little behavior of time that was different from all the other worlds and contrasted. So each one was like a little laboratory where I could take an idea and try it out. And either it worked and it gave me a lot of good puzzles, or it didn't, right? And I threw it away. So like I'd have an idea like, what if the stuff that you rewind lives on in an alternate reality? Like, what does that mean? What puzzles do I get? And I would just make that in its own separate world, right? And it helped that that everything else was simple and that it was easy to build on. Now in that process, I tried a bunch of things that didn't end up in the final game, right? That seemed really cool on paper before I prototyped them, right? And that actually were kind of fun to play, but didn't live up to the rest of the worlds in terms of providing like a rich set of puzzles and things. They didn't quite stand on their own. So like there was this turn-based thing where time moves in fits and starts. I'll actually show you that really fast. There we go. So the idea behind this was like, it's got this sort of control thing, like palette up, and when you press like right and jump, this is a sort of user feedback thing to let you know that you're pressing those even though nothing's happening. And I let go of them to signal that my turn-based turn is done, and like it does that, right? So, whoops. Anyway, so I can kind of navigate a level that way, and it's got this, whoops, sort of, and this is kind of broken, but the rewind was going to just go back to the same like time quanta. So it was more about making strategic choices about how to navigate the level. And that was cool, but I only managed to get like 1 or 2 different flavors of puzzles out of that, and the rest of the game is all about every puzzle is different, and it just didn't quite work. I had a thing that predicts the future, kind of like in Oracle Billiards. Like it would show you like 3 seconds into the future. Like if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to be over here and killed by a monster and whatever. That didn't really change gameplay that much because you already know how to not get killed by monsters. And it also had this AI problem about maybe you weren't going to keep walking right. Maybe you were going to go up the ladder, and how does it know, right? But it was cool to experiment with. It was kind of a successful prototype because it told me some things, but it didn't make it into the game. And I did this like 3D extrusion thing where like, it was one of my original motivations behind wanting to make the game 2D instead of like 3D meshes and stuff, was you can like take 2D and elongate it over time and like stack it up into like this cube-like thing and like rotate it and look at it from different angles. That was cool from a technical sense, but again, it didn't produce gameplay, so I cut it. Now, interestingly enough, so Braid was developed end-to-end without any like real art. It was programmer art, and in fact the time at which it made IGF finals there was still no actual non-programmer art in it. I did a slight revision, or a significant revision, over that first prototype that I showed you guys. It actually had some animations and some nicer textures, but it was obviously like everything was made out of blocks, and it was a very like simple sort of world. It wasn't that like lush sort of outdoorsy thing that you saw. That was really good in that it really helped me focus on the gameplay and not worry about the development of art while I came up with the gameplay concepts. It was maybe bad in the sense that the art had to be developed separately from the game. That takes longer, and you have to work a lot when the development process between art and gameplay is separated like that. You have to work a lot to reintegrate them and make them part of the same thing. Whereas if they were developed organically at the same time, they would have naturally been intertwined. But actually for this game, I think it was the right thing. So basically it had 2 whole distinct phases of development. There was a first phase, which is develop the whole game, it's playable end to end, submit to the IGF, whatever. Then we'll go make it look good. And that's really helped us iterate a lot on the art and understand how the art impacts the puzzles. Like, this puzzle was really clear before, but then when we put certain colors in the environment or made it hard to understand where you were going to land after you jump, it made the puzzle a lot harder because just your brain has to work harder to understand where the platforms are. We need to revise the art style to remake that clear. And I think that the puzzles in this game are so weird in terms of the behavior of time, and it's hard enough to get your brain around them that you really don't need to make that any harder by obfuscating anything. So that's been really good for this game, is the fact that we had a whole separate development just for the art. Okay, so that took a long time, and even before the art process, I was all thinking, what do I want to do as my next game? And if you're a Japanese developer, what you do is you take the name of your game or your franchise and you put the word tactics after it, right? So like Final Fantasy Tactics or Dynasty Tactics or something. And I thought that was really funny. Like I don't know, it's either you get that's funny or you don't. I can't explain it. But it was funny enough to have me design a game called Braid Tactics just because I wanted to. And the more I thought about that, I was like, oh, this could be really cool. It's like a strategy game, and you can it'll have like parallel realities, and you can have units that like move across realities, or that are like live in one, or that are in different places in different realities. And I wanted to prototype that and see what it felt like. So here's Braid Tactics. So basically, there's some flags I can capture, and there's like some forest between me and the flags, and there's like red enemies up at the top, and I'm the blue guys at the bottom. And it's just like many other strategy games. Visibility comes into play because I thought, hey, you could use visibility from one reality to give you partial information about a different reality. Like maybe if I see someone behind the forest, maybe they're behind there in the other reality, or maybe they moved, and like, wouldn't that be cool? So I can command these guys around. I can put them in a specific formation and have them march. And, they go in the forest and they have limited visibility, and that's all really cute. And they're going to come out here and attack some guys, and the other guys are rushing in to attack them, and blah, blah, blah. And they're getting shot at by this archer, probably. Okay. So it was really interesting from a game design standpoint because, I haven't scrolled. So anyway, in what way are the realities different? So I'm playing this game on a full set of alternate realities at once, and what's different is the size of this forest changes from being large, like here, down to being very small. And I'm basically commanding these guys simultaneously on like all these battlefields, right? And the game was supposed to be about thinking about that. Like in this reality, where there's no forest, they could just run up to the flag and don't have any impediment on their movement rate, but the guys can see them further, and the archer can like start firing at them, so they'll be more hurt, right? And then in this one, they have like a lot of concealment, and there's all sorts of interesting things in between, and so that was great. And here, oh look, woohoo! I'm capturing the flag. So one thing that you might notice, there's a lot of kind of like in Oracle Billiards, but to a lesser extent, there's a lot of discontinuity in between the realities. And it actually gets a lot worse than this. It didn't happen this time, but sometimes it happens that you'll have a set of realities where you won, and then there's one where you totally lost, and like the enemies are still standing there like unhurt, and their flag's there, and then there's some more where you won, and you're like, how did that happen? And that was a problem with this prototype. It was, again, it was milder than Oracle Billiards, but I couldn't get my head around it as a designer, and if I can't, then I can't really expect players ever to. I'll skip all this. But it was a successful prototype because, again, even though it didn't feel good to me to play like that sort of slow real-time thing controlling the speed, it felt very tenuous. Like a strategy game like Advance Wars feels a lot more solid. And so my idea with this is someday I want to do a new prototype that takes this and does a more Advance Wars-y thing with it. Who knows? Who knows if I'll ever do that? But it was successful. Like it gave me information that I didn't have before. So here's another prototype that I did. I was over at Chris Hecker's house one day talking about how do we express emotions through games, and I was like, well, music he's all about story, or was back then. And I was all, well, music and paintings and stuff don't have stories most of the time, but they have a lot of emotion. So I decided to do this project that would try to express emotion just through gameplay and not through story or plot. And again, I wanted to build a system that had simple rules, was very straightforward, and I did it actually
one
as
of the questions that occupies forward thinking
as a sort of message to game designers. So I had this tutorial that has like a vocal intro and stuff. And
on the screen, there are.
I'm going to kill that and kill the sound. Basically, this game was about manipulating the player's intention. So it had it's got this very casual, gamey, like abstract thing, and it has different modes that you get in. So like this is a match mode, and my intention in here is to score points by matching things of the same color. So this is my cursor, and I kind of touch a yellow dot, and it's flashing, but you can't see that in this light. And that means that I touch another yellow dot and they pop. And if I touch dots of different colors, that's bad, and it makes a bad noise that you can't hear because I turned the thing off. But there's sort of this terrain that remains constant through all this stuff, is that there's these dots moving around and there's you, right? Here's one where I'm trying to touch these things from sort of the darkest dot to the lightest dot. So you touch them in order and like musical notes happen. Apparently my audio has been killed, so it's not coming out. But anyway.
Again.
Yeah.
The third objective is called.
Yeah. In this one, this is about sort of repelling these dots to keep them on different sides of the play field, which you can't really see in the light. And this one's about staying far away from the dots, like this halo around me. The bigger it is, the more points I get, and it shrinks if I get close to things, right? So it's like this abstract thing, and after you learn these little mini games, right, it puts you through this sequence of manipulating them on you. So it's got this little song. Can I get audio back, please? Yeah. So it's got this little song in this script that's like associated with the song. So over in the lower right, it's sort of scrolling by, and it's telling me what's going to come up. and it's changing the tasks that I'm trying to perform. So now I'm trying to push these really big dots, which are slow and they have a lot of momentum, and now it's changing into a mode where I'm trying to touch them and like match them, and that kind of, it's got a different groove to it, and I'm sitting here, and then it gets to the next measure, and it's going to be back to pushing, because I try to have this pattern like back and forth and back and call and response, and then they shrink, and they'll start moving around. So that was really interesting, and when I set out to do that, the goal was to express emotion like music just through gameplay, and did that work? No. But it was a cool prototype anyway, because it felt different from any game that I'd ever made. Here's one more. Man, I don't have enough time to show this one, but this one took 2 weeks because it's a lot more complicated to implement. This was like, when Nintendo announced their Revolution console, which I guess they renamed at some point to something else. I was like, what can you do with that controller? And I was like, oh, let's paint, let's paint on these surfaces, and you can have this nice thing that sort of looks and feels like a brush stroke. You can have wet brushes, or you can have sort of dry brushes and slather on little streaks and things. And I can just sort of have my little art portfolio of things that I've painted. And so what's the game? Well, I wanted to introduce players to tasks that were easy and didn't require that much imagination and creativity to start, to get used to the controls. But then as you get further in the game, it would be more expressive, because I want you to be able to express whatever you want through gameplay. So in this one, the first guy that gives you jobs, to earn money and stuff, is for some reason wants you to copy classical paintings. And you don't really ask questions why, but so I'm really not going to play this very effectively given the time that I have, but this is my wonderful version of this painting, and he's got a little image comparison algorithm that he'll use to tell me if it sucks or if it's good, and I don't have any skin tone in my color palette over here, so whatever. And he's like, oh wow, he really didn't like that one. Okay, so after you do that for a bit, you can graduate into this guy. He does more schlocky paintings for hotels and stuff. If you've ever hung out on artist message boards, which I did a lot of for Braid development, trying to talk to artists, they have this tradition called a speed paint, where you spend a day or a week doing the best painting that you can, as fast as you can. And so this is speed painting. I'm doing the same thing where I'm trying to copy something, but I've got a timer that ticks up. And if I do it in less than a minute, I can earn anywhere up to $4,000. But after a minute, it starts ticking down. Right, and so I'm trying to balance. I want to do it fast so that I get more money, but I also want to do it high quality so I get more money. And where do I land for each particular painting in that? It's a sort of interesting player choice. Whoops. Okay, whatever. So after you do all that, you can go. This was the meat of the game for me. There's these galleries with all these guys who have different opinions about what they want you to paint. Some of them like certain colors, and some of them like large brush strokes or long brush strokes or thin things. And each of these had a little different algorithm about how he judges stuff. And so I can submit this wonderful painting from my portfolio. And wow, none of these guys liked it. But you can see well, okay. No. Okay, whatever. If you paint a better painting, they'll give you feedback about why they didn't like it. And that was the whole metagame behind this thing. And I can actually go back to my portfolio and see who commented on this, and I can sort of build up this body of work, right? And I can see what they said. And it ends up being this sort of mastermind kind of game where you try to figure out what they do. So anyway, I didn't even finish all the prototypes I wanted to show. I'll just say that the next game I was going to show was going to be my next game that I'm doing after Braid, but it's a Descendant of Raspberry, and it's also a prototype right now, but anyone who wants to see that can come talk to me. Okay, so what do I hope you got out of that I was going to say but I cut? Well, so indies are way more, prototyping is different for us because we're way more invested in the games. These are, for most of us, it's personal expressions of what we want to do. If you're working for a company and the game isn't exactly what you want, you're kind of resigned to that. They're paying you a salary or whatever. For us, it's everything. And that has two aspects to it. One is that we tend to be really attached to the ideas, right? And what I would like to say is, don't worry, feel free to throw things away, or just maybe not throw it away, but sort of put it in a box for a while or a year and come back to it later, because sometimes you need to sleep on something for a while before you get the really good ideas out. Like that raspberry game, the game with all the dots moving around. You know, I put that on a shelf for a year, and then I came back and made something really that I think is really great out of it. But the other thing is, you know, I'm older than a lot of people in this room, so I have maybe a better sense of this, but your life is a sort of very limited resource that you spend by developing games, which take a year or 2 years at a shot. So, you know, be really careful and picky about what you choose to do, and do a lot of prototypes and throw them away and pick the ones that are really, really good. And with that, I'm going to go to questions, if we have time for questions. We don't have time for questions, so... All right, questions out and back. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you around the conference. There's no break. We're jumping straight into the next speaker.